It's kind of like walking into class. Everybody gets quiet. Good evening, everybody. Oh, let's try that again. Good evening. Good evening. There we go. Thank you. Well, welcome to the 34th Clemens Lecture. Here's what I want to do just at the beginning. I want to give some thank yous and acknowledgments, say a few words about what the Clemens Lecture is all about, and then introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Simon Johnson. After his presentation, we'll have an opportunity for audience questions, and one of the things that I think I will do is I'll play Phil Donahue and bring the microphone down, so if people can come down here when they have a question, I can give you the mic and we can all hear what the question is going to be. I might even start out with one myself. You never know. First, some thank yous and acknowledgments. First, definitely, obviously goes to the Willie Me and Virginia Clemens and the Clemens family for endowing the Clemens Chair and the Clemens Lecture. I also want to thank St. John's Institutional Advancement, Sarah and Rob. If you're here, thank you. I think it's Sarah's birthday, so a happy birthday for Sarah. The Department of Economics, all of my colleagues, and our wonderful department coordinator, who I know is not here tonight, but she deserves a round of applause, Ashley Kushel. And then the events staff and the fine arts programming staff for putting together everything that goes into holding an event at the Great Hall and in the Stephen B. Humphrey Auditorium. Thank you very much. I appreciate it very much. It's important to acknowledge that the land we gather on today is the traditional homeland of the Dakota and the Anishinaabe peoples. We honor and respect the indigenous peoples who were forcibly removed from and are still connected to this territory. There are over 20 Native and Indigenous students at our schools from a variety of nations. St. Benedict's Monastery and St. John's Abbey operated boarding schools for Native children. But now, students, faculty, and staff are working to repair relationships with our Native Nation neighbors. Next, a bit about the Clemens Lecture. The purpose of the Clemens Lecture is to bring to campus, quote, prominent economists to speak on the relationship of economics to other academic disciplines and to contemporary issues. Since 1984, we've brought economists who have discussed topics ranging from medieval Franciscan ideas about markets to feminist economics, and from Minnesota's economy to the global trading system. Dr. Dan Finn nurtured and cultivated this lecture series from 1989 to 2023, and the lights are bright so I can't see him, but I want to publicly thank him for this gift to our communities. Thank you, Dan. Now let me introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Simon Johnson. He's the Ronald A. Kurtz 1954 Professor of Entrepreneurship at the MIT Sloan School of Management, where he is head of the Global Economics and Management Group. He earned his BA at the University of Oxford, his MA at the University of Manchester, and his PhD at MIT. He's held a variety of positions in academia and the public sector, including a term as economic counselor and director of the research department at the IMF during the calm, peaceful years of March 2007 through August 2008. Do you remember what was going on during those months? So that's pretty amazing to do that. He's the author of many papers, a number of books, including the co-author of one of the most cited papers in all of economics. It's called The Colonial Origins of Comparative Development, an Empirical Investigation. It's one of the key papers written on the study of how institutions affect economic growth and development. And I inflicted this idea on my students, inflict that idea on my students regularly. So if they want to complain, they can complain to you about writing it. His current research centers on the implications of innovative technologies on the workforce. His recent books include Jumpstarting America, How Breakthrough Science Can Revive Economic Growth and the American Dream, which was co-authored with Jonathan Gruber, and Power and Progress, Our 1,000-Year Struggle Over Technology and Prosperity, co-authored with Darren Asamoglu. And in his lecture tonight, Dr. Johnson will bring us up to date on his thoughts on the subject of technology and inequality in the age of AI. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Johnson to our campuses.
Thank you very much, Louis. That was a wonderful introduction. I hope we got it on tape. I'm just going to play that wherever I appear around the country from now on. It's really a great honor and a privilege to be with you here today. And it's particularly exciting to see so many young students of economics in the auditorium. And the message that I was asked to convey from your faculty, who are mostly in the second row, is this will be on the final exam. So pay a lot of attention. All right, so the topic is technology and inequality in the age of AI. It is 7:39 in Minnesota. It's 8:30 in the East Coast where I spend my time. So I'm going to try and be as lively as possible, as stimulating as possible, to wake you up, to make sure I don't fall asleep, and to get us as quickly as we can to the question period. And the real reason I'm here, I understand when you give a lecture like this, it is conventional for the lecturer to actually present some material. So don't worry, Provost, I will do that. But the real reason I'm here is to hear what you think about artificial intelligence, what comes next, the threats, the opportunities. And I have to admit, this is the topic of my next book, the one that isn't yet written. So if you tell me anything really interesting and insightful, I promise to use it without attribution. I promise to cite you properly when we get to the point of drafting that. So this is my one-slide summary of the entire talk. If you fall asleep and right after this slide, you will have got the main message, which is, when you listen to the debates, and there are plenty of debates, and I hope you are listening to them, and I hope you're involved in them, actually. I hope you're having them on this campus, and I hope you have them as you move through your careers and your lives around the United States and around the world. I think you'll hear two strikingly different views about artificial intelligence and its implications. The first is, of course, extremely optimistic, that AI will give us capabilities that no human has previously had, or perhaps even very few humans have previously imagined. So that, of course, is the techno-optimism. And the potential impact in terms of jobs, of course, might be that many of us will not need to work again, and perhaps we'll share in this prosperity through some form of universal basic income, and perhaps we can do other things with our lives other than earn income in a way that's been conventional for 10,000 years. But of course, there's another view which you hear, and this is a view that you also need to take seriously. I think some of the more famous people are in the techno-optimism camp. Some of the richest people in the world are in that camp, to be honest. But there's also a very strong point of view that, really, this is not so good. Because what's going to happen is a lot of people are going to lose their jobs and be relegated to some form of second-class status within our society. So this is a form of techno-pessimism in which would actually be really bad for even the super smart people, younger people in this room this evening. So I'll tell you my punchline and the work that we do at MIT, which is absolutely ongoing. It's with co-authors. I'll tell you about them in a moment. And because it's AI and because it's changing so fast, I reserve the right to change my opinion tomorrow. I mean, we all get to update based on facts, right, Louis? So this is my view tonight in this speech, which is many of the promises, I think, have been exaggerated with regards to what's going to happen to US productivity. I don't think there's a miracle coming. I don't think there's an enormous bounty to be shared. We can talk about ways in which this might go a little bit better, a little bit worse. What worries us a lot is what's going to happen to the job market, not the entire or rapid destruction of opportunity, but continuing job market polarization. So some people do well and other people do much less well. We've seen plenty of that. I'll take you through the data in a moment. AI, unfortunately, is leaning towards having more of that potential impact than an equalizing impact, for example. And I think there's also a very important set of issues about global inequality that we'll touch on tonight. And if for those of you interested in research or policy work, there's an incredible field of activity and investigation that awaits you, because very little has been done on this topic so far, but barely scratched the surface. The main point, though, that I want to leave you with my summary slide, remember, is that none of this has to be necessarily one way or the other. Everything we have ever done with technology as humans, everything we've done in this country with technology, including building this incredible state, including all the transformations that happened in the United States past 200 years, including all the difficulties that we've encountered and the problems that have been inflicted on people. All of these are choices. We make choices about what technology to develop, how to deploy the technology, who should gain and who should lose from technology. And that's what I really want us to drill down on as we go through this evening, which is what are the choices we're making, who's making those choices, and who is going to really benefit from those choices. And would you like, I mean, it's a question to you. I'm not here to tell you your preferences. Your preferences are for you to decide. But what choices do you want us to make in terms of technology, and how would we head in a direction that you would prefer? So I asked a very prominent techno-entrepreneur the question recently, what did he think the impact on the job market would be of AI and you know, the ChatGPT and the various generative AI versions that you're seeing around you. And this person, who I will not name for obvious reasons, literally said to me, "We will all be gods." By which he meant that you will have, everybody in this room will have the capabilities to do incredible things, to transform, actually he said, the universe, to play with galaxies, also a quote. And the degree of extraordinary promise and I would say hubris in that statement is something that we should absolutely consider and talk about a little bit later. But I'm going to focus on a rather more mundane and I think absolutely critical issue, which is who gets the good jobs? Because in any technological transformation, some people end up with good jobs, paying good money, good working conditions, and some people either don't benefit or they get something that you and I and most of the people would not regard as a good job. So who's going to get those jobs? This is the topic of the book that I wrote with Doron Acemoglu, Power and Progress, Our 1,000-Year Struggle Over Technology and Prosperity. And it's based on, what I'm going to talk about tonight is based on joint work with Doron, who's an institute professor at MIT, and our colleague David Autor, who's one of the country's leading labor economists. We have a research group at MIT that actively looks at this, tries to understand from a labor point of view, from a macroeconomic point of view, from a variety of economic perspectives, what is actually happening in the labor market in and around new technology development, particularly artificial intelligence. So the problem is that any technology, when it's adopted, is adopted at a particular moment, in a particular context. And we are coming, or AI is coming to us, we are coming to AI, depending how you want to frame it, at a time when we've already encountered a great deal of job market polarization. So these are some fairly famous pictures. They're actually, the credit got cut off. These are pictures from David Autor's work, which show in the top what happened to the weekly earnings of men since the 1960s, and the bottom shows you what happened to the weekly earnings of women. And for those of you who've taken, I think, any economics course, you may have come across some version of this, which is that over the past 60 years, men with a lot of education, some sort of graduate degree, or actually bachelor's degree even, have done much better than men who didn't go to college, didn't finish high school. So there's been a big separation, and as I'll talk in a moment, this has not always been the case in the United States. The job market polarization for women is a little bit less marked, but it's absolutely there. And COVID, by the way, compressed wages a little bit, but not by that much, compressed the difference between the high end and the low end, and that may well now be receding. So the fear is that AI will be, in the language of economics, biased towards skill, which means it's going to boost the productivity of highly skilled people, which actually, I think, and I hope includes everybody in this room, your productivity will go up by more than the productivity of people who have less education than you, or people who have not much education at all. And that, if that's the case, that will further polarize the job market. That's entirely possible. And this would then be a function of both AI and the moment that we're in, the job market polarization, which I'll talk about. In addition, I think we have to worry about what AI will do, or how it will be used to distort democracy. So we faced, and I'll talk about them, we talk about them in the book, and I'll talk about them in a little bit this evening, various moments in the past where we've confronted difficult technological choices and difficult moments with regard to our income distribution. And the American democracy has proved remarkably resilient and able to deal with extremely tense moments. This is obviously an extremely tense moment, another one in the United States, but it's not by any means the first time. But what does complicate it is we're using a technology that the people who develop this technology have found their way to a business model in which they get your attention, and they get advertising dollars for getting your attention by making you angry, by making you emotional, by making young people, for example, very upset about a variety of issues. And this is not just, I would say distasteful, unfortunate. It's extremely damaging, potentially, to our ability to have a reasonable debate, to discuss the pros and cons, to talk about what could be reasonable policy in this context. Now, this chart is a little more technical than my other material, but just to flag for you, particularly for students of economics, that the labor share of GDP is a very important indicator of who wins and who gains from technological transformations. And you can see in the top chart what's happened in the United States since the 1950s. We had a relatively high labor share of GDP. It's declined with some ups and downs along the way, of course, and we're now at a level that we have not previously experienced in this post-war period. We are still, however, in terms of labor share of income, above what's experienced in some other countries. So don't think that workers and the compensation for workers has gotten pushed down as low as it can be pushed down as a share of GDP. Other countries have less good outcomes. I also want to flag for you, and we can talk about this in the Q&A if you want, I don't think we know enough. I think we're still very early with regard to the development of the technology, but I want to flag very important concerns about what happens to global inequality as a result of this technology. There has been a rising up for some countries over the past half century as they found themselves better able to take advantage of opportunities in the global economy, which are linked to falling cost of computers, falling cost of telecommunications, falling costs of long-distance transportation. And many of these countries that have done relatively well have done it by building manufacturing sectors where they export to the world. There is some controversy about that arrangement, and I'll talk about that in a few slides. But in general, this method of economic development has proved relatively resilient, and more countries find themselves attracted to some version of that. But and AI right now, to be clear, is not yet ready to turn factories into primarily robot-run operations. That there's some major obstacles in the way, which we can discuss if you're interested. But it's coming. And I have many talented colleagues at MIT who spend their time, and their labs spend a huge amount of effort thinking about how to automate more of manufacturing around the world. And if that happens, you're going to see some major problems for many of the middle and likely lower income countries on this chart. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. As I said, there are choices. I'm not predicting doom and gloom. I'm saying there's pressure and there are difficulties ahead along our baseline path. Now, what about this idea of choice? What about this idea of there being another path, a different set of outcomes? Well, one way to think about this is to go back into history. I'm a big fan of economic history. And to think about where the United States came from. In 1851, the British held a great exhibition. They called it the Great Exhibition, in Crystal Palace in London. It was the first exhibition of its kind. The British were immensely proud of what they'd achieved in their version of the Industrial Revolution to that point, and they invited countries from around the world to send their most impressive goods and manifestations of what they were able to now produce using the latest machinery of the day. The United States sent some stuffed animals and some guns they'd used to shoot them. Okay, a few other things, but that was the primary U.S. exhibit in 1851. I'm not kidding. By 1890, the United States was the leading industrial power in the world. That's what this chart shows you here. How did they do that? How did the people who came before us turn what was a relatively slow-moving, primarily agricultural country into this incredibly productive manufacturing, soon-to-be superpower? Well, it's really very interesting because, remember, most of the labor that came to the United States in the 19th century did not come with a lot of skill and a lot of education. Most of those people were relatively uneducated, certainly by today's standards. Even by the standards of the 19th century, many of the people with high skill and high wages stayed behind in Europe. It was people who were frustrated with their opportunities in Europe or disappointed or worried about their futures. They were the ones who came. And the brilliance of what economic historians have called the American system of manufacturing is that the people who ran the companies of the day, the people who built the private sector that powered this extraordinary economic takeoff, they found ways to hire these less educated people, to teach them skills on the job, to help them become more productive. And actually, this industrial miracle was powered by relatively unskilled labor. That's the incredible fact about the American 19th century. That technology then became widely available. These companies spread their wings around the world. Similar technology boosting the productivity of less skilled people arrived in other countries. Some of it went back to the United Kingdom, by the way, and helped people in those industries and those companies become more productive, and that led through a process of negotiation and some union organization and some big arguments about that, but that eventually led to higher wages, higher incomes, and that's what built the middle class in this country and elsewhere. So sometimes you hear that technology, improvements in technology, automatically deliver higher wages and higher prosperity. I don't think that's actually true, and that's not what's in the historical data, and you can look at the book if you want more details. I think it makes it possible, but whether or not you actually boost productivity and whether or not you actually pay high wages is a result of those managerial choices, the policy choices, and the negotiation with workers. In the 19th century, there was a positive transformation of key sectors, including railways. Very important in terms of creating opportunities upstream, making the metal and the machines that made locomotives possible, and downstream in terms of all the new activities that were now possible using trains. These were highly skilled jobs, or they were jobs that you could get without much skill to start with. You could acquire the skill, you could get highly paid, and you could move up in society. You could take advantage of those opportunities. You could open an entire continent, which is what happened with the United States. Now, Henry Ford brought two things to this set of issues. Henry Ford's attitudes, by the way, were not at all modern and should be avoided at all costs. But he did two things that we have to take note of. First of all, he brought production onto a moving assembly line. And secondly, he brought electricity to that assembly line. So when Henry Ford started in Detroit around 1900, there were 20,000 workers in that industry making perhaps 30,000 cars a year. In 1929, Ford and GM together made 3 million cars, and that industry employed 400,000 people. So this is what's interesting about that phenomenon and that period, which is Henry Ford automated the assembly of cars. So when new technology arrives, and this is the issue with AI, some part of its impact will be automation. In part, it will replace people doing the tasks they were previously doing. But if the technology is deployed in a way that creates new tasks, and that's what happened in the auto industry, then you get new jobs, then you have a rising demand for labor, then you're much more likely to get higher wages. So what were those new tasks? Well, the new tasks were all the inputs that went into making cars. They were all the things you could do with cars, build roads, build suburbs. And it's that transformation that really helped boost American prosperity. It really helped share prosperity across the United States. And that's what we're looking for, and that's what we're hoping for as we turn to AI. Oops. If you look at what happened to US wages, these are nominal wages. I'll give you real wages adjusted for inflation in a few moments. If you look at what happened to nominal wages, you can see the rise of US wages in the post-war period. You can also see the dark blue line catching up to the US. That's the industrialization and the development of Japan in the post-war period. Wages of China and India remained much lower, and I'll come back to that shortly. But this is a manifestation of the ways in which higher productivity was converted into higher wages and shared prosperity in the post-war period in the United States. So what's artificial intelligence going to do? What are we expecting, or what should we expect, or what do we see happening around us? And of course, it's always very hard when you're in the middle of any transformation like this to know exactly what the pattern is. We know that in part, AI is about automation. Absolutely is going to replace workers previously doing a set of tasks. So I was talking to one CEO about this, and he said the jobs in his company that are, well, this was a year ago, so he said they're about to be replaced. I think most of them are probably gone already. He called them, this was his term, not my term, he called them the cut and paste jobs. This means white-collar jobs that have a highly repetitive element. They're not completely repetitious because something that is completely repetitious has already been automated away. But these are jobs that, if you look at LinkedIn, would be perhaps between the 20th and 30th percentile of the income distribution. They're jobs held by people who have a high school education, maybe some college education. Low-level clerical work could also be a consideration, but also entry-level jobs. So traditionally, the way this labor market has worked is that young people like yourselves have gotten a job that has some repetition at the beginning of the career. You then build some responsibility and experience, and then you move up. That initial layer of hiring is almost certainly going to be weaker than it was previously because of AI. If you look at what happened in the early British Industrial Revolution, between, let's say, 1780 and 1840, there was an enormous amount of automation in some industries, such as cotton textiles, and no increase in wages. Not for most workers. So just because we're automating, just because we're replacing some workers, does not necessarily translate into higher incomes for other people in that sector, for example. The key thing, as I mentioned before, is whether we create new tasks. Now, my colleague David Autor has calculated that about 60% of the jobs we have in the US today did not exist in the 1940s. So that's good news. We do create new tasks. We do create new jobs. We do this much better than some other economies, for example. The European economy doesn't do quite so well in this. But, and from 1940 to 1980, we did that. We created enough new tasks to balance the automation and to keep the income distribution relatively similar. But since 1980, we've experienced this big widening of income inequality. We've automated, in that sense, more than we've created new tasks. And the technology has been biased towards helping people with a relatively high skill. So new tasks have not kept up with what we need. Now, there are some interesting microeconomic studies of what you can actually do with AI. Again, this is an emerging field that I commend to anyone in the audience of any age who wants to do some interesting research. So what we know is that it can make it reduce the time to complete writing tasks. Well, I think some of you found that out with your assignments already. It can improve your grades, well, depending on how the professors feel about it. And it can reduce grade inequality, so there is some suggestion that it might help people who are struggling with material, for example, become better at, well, passing tests. The very interesting work on customer service done by Eric Brynjolfsson, who's now at Stanford, and Danielle Lee, who's at MIT, suggests that when somebody's helping you with a software issue, for example, this is a company they studied, that when you give them an AI advisor, so an expert advisor, which is the AI giving them hints on prompts, then the less experienced people become better at providing good customer service, and the people they're helping and they become happier with their job, and the people they're helping become more satisfied. That's terrific, but I also have to tell you the latest word from the front lines of customer service is the most productive organizations in the world with regard to helplines, and there are some very well-run companies that outsource a lot of these activities. They manage the outsourced business. They are not considering cutting workers. They've already cut workers by 10 to 20% because AI does the transcription. And some of them are, I think, very actively considering even more dramatic reductions in the number of workers that they need. Well, look, again, this is how technology is deployed. This is the impact of technological change. That's automation that I was mentioning to you. But where are the new tasks? Who's creating those tasks? Whose job is it to create new tasks? This is the problem we now face. Now, we can also dig in more deeply, and I, in the interest of time and to get to the questions quicker, we'll go through this very quickly, but we can look at who has the skills likely to be rewarded in this AI-driven economy, or economy in which the AI becomes more important. And so you can look at the mismatches between different kinds of skill sets, different kinds of expertise. It is very hard to know, let's be completely honest, because this is changing so rapidly and because the capabilities of AI are emergent. We're seeing them. And yes, it's expensive to use AI. Yes, it uses a lot of energy, but there's a massive amount of investment going into making AI cheaper, reducing the energy costs, and making these tools more useful to everybody. The news, though, so far is, if you look at work done by McKinsey, for example, women and younger workers are more at risk. They're more exposed to skills, or they have skills, exposure of skills is the technical term, to generative AI. So if you look at what generative AI can do and look at the skills that various people have, you can see who's vulnerable, who's going to need to move on, who's going to need to acquire new skills, who's going to find more pressure because the boss wants to use an algorithm to do what they did previously. And I think young people are absolutely in the line of fire unless until you're able to do things differently from what young people before you were doing. And I think that's a difficult question if you're 19 or 21 or 24, to really have to find some way to pivot, to find some way to build expertise that is relatively immune from AI. And I hope you've got ideas about how to do it, and I hope we can turn to those when we get to the questions in a few moments. So there are optimistic macroeconomic forecasts about AI. This is back to the idea about techno-optimism. is there going to be a massive acceleration of growth? And you can look in my slides, which we'll make available. There are links to all the papers, and you can look at the research for yourself. I think that the careful studies, including one by my colleague Jeroen Astomoglu, suggest that yes, it will have some effect. It does increase productivity, as John Williams, who's the president of the New York Fed, says. The quote's on the slide. This will be part of how the US continues to generate the kind of productivity growth that we've experienced in recent decades, but it's very unlikely to be transformative. The technology as we see it today will chip away at opportunities. It will put pressure on particular people in the labor markets, but it's not going to so transform productivity that there's a massive bounty to be shared through universal basic income or in any other way. And then we need to put this into some global context. And again, well, as Lewis said, I was previously the chief economist of the International Monetary Fund, and I'm happy to talk with you about this more, as much as you want, actually. I think that the problem that you see here, this is real wages, is the US at the top. You can see real wages, this is for low-skilled workers. You can see that real wages rose in the 50s and 60s and plateaued after the 1980s. That's the counterpart of the widening inequality picture I showed you earlier. And you can see Japanese wages rising. That's what an economic miracle looks like in the post-war period, rising up towards US real wage levels. But look at India as a reference point, which is a country that has done better of late, but struggled to have any kind of sustained shared prosperity. And look at the line just above India, which is China. So China has become an export powerhouse. It has a very large manufacturing sector. It sells to the world. It's achieved some of the same things that Japan has achieved, including, we think, in terms of productivity. It has not raised real wages for people at the low end of the income distribution, not according to the data, which, by the way, they don't provide anymore. So could we come up with policy, could we collectively, we can come up with policy that, we propose policy all the time, and we have no trouble proposing, putting forward ideas. But is it possible as a country we could actually find policies that would shape AI in what we call a pro-worker direction? So a way that actually boosts the productivity of lower wage, lower skilled workers. That's the key, right? If you could tilt the technology to boost their productivity, you create more opportunity, more demand for that kind of labor, higher wages. That's what we did in the 19th century. That was the American system of manufacturing that I mentioned. So there are certainly things that you could do. You could have grand challenges, pulling the technology towards helping consumers, for example. You could put standards in place for workplace surveillance. If workplace surveillance makes you safer, then it's fine. But if it drives you to work too hard or increases workplace accidents, then it's not okay. And we could actually, this enormous potential use for AI in government across all levels of federal government, and I think state and local as well. The problem is, and we have some very good conversations with companies. Corporate leaders are interested, although I'd say almost entirely focused on the bottom line, and the bottom line tends to be driven by automation. That's a feature of the American corporate landscape. Workers and trade unions are also, you can imagine, very interested in this topic, and some of them are attempting to be engaged, but they don't really develop technology. When you talk to government, this is super interesting. I appeared before a House panel on these issues earlier this year. It was a panel that was held behind closed doors, so there were no cameras, and there was no publicity. And it was very unlike the political discussions you hear in public. It was very civilized and bipartisan, for want of a better word. But there was also agreement on both sides of the aisle that innovation is a good thing and they don't want to stop it. And they are, with a few exceptions, very much not inclined to regulate AI until we see what happens. Well, the problem with that is, of course, technology moves so fast and the effects are so profound that by the time you see things you don't like, it's rather late, and you've probably created a very powerful industry that's extremely hard to regulate. That is what happened with social media. So, I think we are facing a problem. The technology is moving rapidly. The technology is leaning towards automation. The technology is tending to chip away at opportunities for people who need those opportunities. And we can layer in what I mentioned before, which is the pressure on democracy and the danger posed by digital advertising and the way that AI makes it really easy to manipulate you and me. Everyone is much easier to manipulate now using the latest AI tools than we were 5 or 10 years ago. So the book we wrote is Power and Progress. And the encouraging reaction is people want to talk about it. People want to think about AI, and they want to argue about alternative futures and how to get there. And I think we do see some glimmers of a potential policy reaction, but I don't promise that on our current course it will be in time. I think it's very common in the United States that we like to let things happen, experience the effects, feel bad about things, and then try to fix it. I think we may get more of the same with regard to AI. But it doesn't have to be that way. How we imagine the technology, what we do with the technology, is up to you. It's up to smart people, innovative people, people with education, leaders of our communities, to think about what are the real problems you want to solve? What is it that you want technology to do for you? How should humans use technology? What's appropriate, what's not, what's a good idea, what helps your communities, what boosts everybody's life opportunities, what shares prosperity? AI is an opportunity, and AI could be a major force for better outcomes. But to get us onto that trajectory, onto that course, would require considerable effort, would require considerable debate, and considerable confrontation with some pretty powerful and important companies and people who want to take us in a different direction. Thank you very much.
So I want to make sure that everybody who wants to ask a question can be heard. So you can either raise your hand or come down up here to the front, and I'll bring the microphone around. I want to start with, I'm going to take the advantage of asking a question first, and I wanted to pick up on what you were saying at the end. A word I didn't hear you say was it's going to require leadership. Do you think that it's important that our political leaders become more educated, familiar with what these issues that you're talking about, or do they have any familiarity with this at all so that they can help lead the discussion? Or are you pessimistic about that? I'd like to hear what you think about that.
So, as I mentioned, I appeared before this House panel earlier this year, and I have been involved in various other discussions on Capitol Hill, as well as with people in the executive branch. And I would say that, in general, these are smart people who are really well informed. You don't always see that in the public statements and the messaging. I understand, there's various other considerations there. But they are trying hard to stay up with the technology that's developing rapidly. And they are, concern, legitimately concerned, again, on both sides of the aisle, of what could go wrong, particularly because it could go wrong very quickly, right? That's obviously something we have all picked up on with regard to the speed of AI developments. But at least since the 1940s, and maybe we can go back to the 19th century, US leadership has been quite convinced that being at the forefront of technology is important for prosperity and also national security. And as soon as anyone suggests there might be a form of regulation that would slow down innovation, someone at the back of the room, this is a metaphor, but you'll get the point, someone at the back of the room will say, China. That's all you have to say in Washington, China. Because the implication is that if you don't invent it, someone else will, and that other someone might not be very friendly, and you might regret that. So slowing innovation is not going to win the day. Pivoting innovation, using innovation to improve education, to improve healthcare, to address problems of, you name it, whatever your problems are, that's interesting. So pivoting or broadening the portfolio, so we're not just manipulating young people with AI, we're actually doing something constructive, that's an interesting line, Lewis. And that's the sort of thing that we try to work on and encourage people to develop those ideas.
Following up on that point, AI requires tremendous amounts of energy. Read an article recently where the demand is going to outstrip the supply in not too extended period of time. Consequently, how democratic is the process in allocating energy? And you mentioned the Chinese, but also within this economy. For example, Microsoft just applied to have 3 Mile Island reactivated so that they can have that energy to take care of their cloud. Could you respond to that question?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. So the ability of a country to generate sufficient electricity is going to be important for training AI models and maybe for using AI models. I think we should expect energy intensity to come down, but it's still a lot of energy. And the US, one reason the US is in a strong position with regard to developing this technology is we're at the forefront of leadership with certain computer chips. But also we have an ability to produce a lot of energy and make that energy available, but that will raise the price of energy to all other customers. So I think you're going to see people squeezed in many markets. As you know, we don't have we don't have an entirely unified national market for energy. So depending on which part of the country you're in, you may see more pressure on electricity prices, which will be driven by data centers as well as by AI models, training, and utilization. So that will be a very big pressure on lower income people, for example, through the price of electricity.
Thank you. I have a question about what we're talking about when we talk about AI and progress in AI. There seems to be, at least in my reading, 2 types of models. One is sort of the steady state. You got deep learning. You've got that, and that's going to be with us for a long time, and maybe nothing much else after that. But there's also the question, since deep learning is limited, of what about radical innovations coming rather quickly? And we're going to need it because Moore's law may or may not be hitting the limit. What do you see? Do you see that we are going to have sort of that steady state, deep learning is going to be with us and not much else, or will we see more radical innovations?
So it's a very good question. And I have been at MIT for 39 years. I went there in 1985 to get my PhD. I was 10 years old, by the way. And one thing I have learned from that nearly half century is to be extremely careful when it comes to thinking that the limits to technology or constraints on technology are going to be binding. Because my extremely talented engineering, and in this case computer science colleagues, are working flat out to enhance the capabilities of AI that we're already seeing. And I don't know which methods will prevail, but it's a massive competition for ideas among some of those brilliant people in the world with essentially unlimited funding at their backs, right? Because remember, so Lewis was kind enough to mention my one of my other books, Jumpstarting America, in which I advocated for lots more federal funding for science and technology spread around the country, generate good jobs, strengthen local housing markets, and so on. You know, that's a good pitch, and I think we got some traction with that. And maybe in the end, we'll get some extra, I don't know, $2 or $8 billion devoted to that over some period of years. I mean, that's nothing compared to what's being thrown into AI, right? All the talent is being sucked out of other research projects, and actually some of this talent's been sucked out of universities to work in the private sector on exactly these issues. So, you know, sometimes we do encounter dead ends, and supersonic. We don't fly supersonic passenger aircraft over land. Turns out that was a dead end, right? But in general, we have experienced multiple major breakthroughs over the past 200 years when we apply this amount of brain power, and when money's not an object. Think of World War II, for example, and the progress made on radar and lots of other things. So I think that you're going to be amazed by the technical capabilities of what comes in the next 5 years, but I fear you may be disappointed by the social impact and the labor market impact. That's what my concern would be. It's like who gains and who loses, and do we have does that happen at a time scale where we can really affect it, or is it just all of a sudden we wipe out, a vast sector of opportunity, and then we're struggling to catch up?
I'm wondering if there is a steady stream of radical technology, whether that affects the competitive situation between the U.S. and China, where we might come out ahead.
Yeah. So the question is, if there's a radical stream of technology innovation, does that help the U.S. relative to China? And I think the answer is yes. I think if we're talking about a technological frontier that's relatively fast-moving and particularly rewards a lot of crazy, creative people who are thinking things that humans have never thought before, that's a massive American edge. I think China has some other advantages that they have deployed and can deploy. But I think actually in AI right now, the US is way ahead of the world. One of my colleagues who works with, let's call them major investors in this space, so he advises the people who have the money, who are deploying this, investing, is confident that of all the capital going into developing foundational models, so presumably what will remain the core and the core of value in this global industry, 95% of that money is going to the US, to be spent in the US, 3% in Europe, and 2% in the rest of the world. Those are his numbers. So, yeah, the US is, if you just think of it, if it's a technological arms race, if this is like a new Cold War, and we want to beat the Russians who've just launched Sputnik in 1957, we're going to do fine. That's not the problem. The American problem has never actually been inability to invent, not since we took off from the 19th century. The question is, what do we do with it? And who benefits? And do we share it? Right? Even in our own society, let alone around the world. Lewis is over here. Oh, the microphone's over here. Yes, please.
Yeah, so what's the difference between Palantir and also C3.ai, especially when it comes to bioinformatics and stuff like that for the medical device industry and the medical industry as a whole? And how do you differentiate them?
That's a pretty technical and specific issue. You should come hang out at MIT and with some of my colleagues who work on this. In fact, we have a workshop on Thursday morning on the ethics of AI in healthcare. If you want to tune in for that, I can send you the information because I know Anna, who's sitting next to you. I don't know exactly. It would be one honest answer to that. I think that there is great hope for AI in some parts of biomedical research. There's also a lot of protections around data there, which is a good thing. Oh, yeah. And that's one space I think we might actually get the balance right because those protections are already so strong. I think I worry more about most other sectors of the economy where we don't protect the data quite so effectively. Whether the algorithms will be so powerful and compelling compared to trained humans, trained expert humans, remains to be seen. I mean, I think that there has been a big wave of enthusiasm along the lines of Jeffrey Hinton saying you don't need any more radiologists or train any more radiologists. I think that's exaggerated, and I think you do want skilled people. But algorithms helping people make decisions, algorithms helping people reduce their biases, algorithms helping you see something that you didn't previously see so clearly, that's really quite possible. And so there's a lot of upside potential there, but we've got to get the ethics right. I think that's absolutely fundamental in healthcare.
Got a question back here. I'm getting the microphone. It's Tom. You could pass that in.
Thank you very much for your talk. You mentioned that young people were particularly at risk, among others. At liberal arts colleges, we always talk about how great it is to focus on critical thinking. Is that immune from the AI, or is it particularly at risk? Or should our students start being good at flipping hamburgers, or should they take more math?
Well, yes, look, the problem is, of course, that, you put it very well, by the way, the choice. The problem is, of course, that we do have a lot of jobs at the low end of the labor market, manual work, and the AI is not going to take over most of those jobs. The robot versions of AI are not very good. It's a much harder computational problem than you might imagine to do basic physical tasks. Well, you know this, but other people may not. But that part of the labor market is very crowded. And then what happened after the 1980s was people who had middle skill, middle income, middle education jobs lost those jobs, got pushed down to the lower end of the labor market, where they struggled to make a living wage. So that's a very harsh outcome in modern America, and I think in the America of the future, any America that I can imagine. Now, what you want is for people to find those skills that are relatively remote from the impact of AI. And I agree with you, or I want to believe that critical thinking is an important part of that. And it is certainly true that the algorithms are not particularly good at some of the things we think of as being critical thinking. The problem is that a lot of our jobs involve routine thinking. A lot of things that we think are important, many other people have done before. I mean, I had 3 brilliant ideas driving in from the airport. Thank you for the ride, Anna. But they were probably not original ideas to me at all, right? I just exaggerated that in my own mind. So yes on critical thinking, yes on thinking outside the box, yes on being creative, yes on doing things and wanting to do things and doing things that humans have never done before. Because obviously what the algorithms are a big plagiarism exercise on human knowledge. Sophisticated, clever, quite effective in some ways. But I think that what you want and what the world wants and what we all need is to keep pushing for better solutions to a wider set of problems that we haven't solved. That's why they're problems. We're 330-some million people in a world of 8 billion. This is the most innovative, creative society in the history of humankind by a long way. There's enormous problems out in the world. Go solve those problems with your critical thinking and figure out how to deploy technology to assist that solution. That, to me, seems to be a winning combination. Can we get an undergraduate to ask a question? Does that happen here? Right behind you, yes. Extra credit.
Do you have any thoughts on the effect of AI on students in the computer science field finding jobs? Or have you heard anything related from your colleagues at MIT? Or do you think that this will fit into the same trend that you talked about of higher educated students using AI for the most benefit?
So it's a great question. And I'd be delighted to hear labor market experiences, because some of you are obviously looking for a job now. So there's 2 forces at work. One is what I mentioned with regard to customer service, which is AI can make somebody with less experience more productive. So that's good for a young person, right? But it also, when it comes to automation, the set of tasks we're going to be automating are those relatively repetitious tasks. So entry-level programming. Okay, here's a bright person I've just hired out of a top university like this one. They're going to go far in my organization, but the first year I'm going to have them do some relatively mundane tasks. Or the same thing could go for law firms, right? What does a junior associate do? A lot of relatively repetitious things, and then they move up to become a partner. It's not clear that employers want to spend the money on those repetitious tasks. So I think as a young person, what you need to do and find, and what will be rewarded, is when you can find a path along which the technology accelerates your progress, enhances the speed with which you move up. I understand it's already high pressure in a lot of these jobs and already pretty difficult, so I'm not saying this is easy. But I think that pathway does exist. But I have a lot of my computer science colleagues are very concerned about the first job that their graduates are going to get, because the tasks that were previously assigned to new graduates from MIT can now be done better by an algorithm, right? It's good at programming, basic code. And then you have an expert look at it. We did some work with the Hollywood screenwriters when they were on strike last year. And this was an interesting, these are very smart people who have imagined every dystopian future. In fact, they wrote all the movies that you've seen with dystopian futures, so that's good. They learn their own lessons. And what they fear, in fact, I would say what some of them are convinced will happen, not in this contract, because they negotiated this, the studio, so the studios can't do this for the next, 7 years. But they think what will happen is a studio executive will tell the AI the story that they want, roughly. The AI will write something not very well, and then they'll hire somebody just out of film school to make it seem like a human wrote it. Okay, good job, good news for the person right out of film school, but a whole other middle tier of screenwriting goes out the window in that scenario. A question I have is, why do you even need a studio executive? Right? Well, you just need one capitalist who spouts off ideas to the AI, and then you have some other algorithm that sorts them out, and then maybe you have a human at some point. Why is that human even in the United States? I can get you a lot of much cheaper native English language speakers in other places, including my hometown in the north of England. Who's got the next question? Yeah.
Hello. So kind of on the topic of research and think tanks and stuff like that, about 11 days ago, OpenAI publicly released for the first time their new concept of O1, essentially talking more about the quality of data as opposed to the quantity. They really wanted to hit on what happens if we ask ChatGPT a question for 1 week as opposed to only giving it 1 second. What do you think developments like this in the field of AI will go on to do downstream for things like think tanks and researchers, stuff like you do? And how do you think this will create a positive growth factor for AI? Thank you.
Well, I think this is related to the earlier question about sort of the ragged frontier and where exactly we make progress. We don't know. But this is the strength of the American system, right? A lot of different models being tried, models meaning business models, and a lot of different potential pathways that are being explored. What does it mean for researchers like me is a pretty impudent question, which I like a lot. That's a good thing, impudence. It's like critical thinking. And I think it's going to be a big challenge for a lot of people in the research space who produce relatively straightforward reports, corporate reports, for example, analyst reports. There's a lot of reporting of financial data is already fully automated. So I think that for research as a generic activity, it's pressure, without question. So then what we need to do at MIT or anywhere is more original work, do things that no human's ever done before, do things that algorithms can't imagine, push on those frontiers. And that, I think, will remain pretty fertile space for a long time. But nobody's immune. Nobody gets a free pass at all in this. And it is, some people feel, I think it's not quite as symmetric as some people feel, but previous rounds of automation were focused on replacing physical labor with machines. This is replacing some aspects of mental labor or thinking, some aspects of thinking with an algorithm. And so that's a problem for all of us who have comfortable white-collar jobs and imagine that's what our children and grandchildren would do. Yes, sir.
Do you see major changes in the financial services industry? For example, increased use of quantitative algorithms, quantitative trading algorithms, for example, like companies like Rentech, who run the Medallion Fund. Do you see an increased use of AI to exploit market shortcomings for greater profit?
Well, I have two ideas for you, John. I know your name is John because you sat next to me at dinner. One is a cautionary tale and maybe a career, and the second is a great business idea just occurred to me for you in particular. So the cautionary tale, it comes from a research paper written by Gary Gensler, who was my former colleague at MIT, a couple of years ago, in which he said, what if all the trading in the world is done using the latest and best AI? It gets a lot faster, it gets really smart, humans kind of know what's going on, but maybe not, and it's very easy to imagine, and he goes into some detail, ways in which you could get big financial crashes because everyone is herding around the same sort of phenomena because they're all using the same algorithms. Now, Gary Gensler is now chair of the Securities Exchange Commission in the United States, which is a very good thing for the United States, but I don't think he has been able to get any traction preventing people from doing that because these are private companies deciding what to do, and the algorithms do help them make money in good times, but they may exacerbate the downside when there's certain kinds of shocks or other problems manifest themselves. The business idea, so the way to go into that is to go into securities regulation, which I'm sure will make you very excited and your family happy, but it's a good line of work. But the real business idea is actually, let me ask you this. So all of those AI, all of this, the AI that sorts information, that collects a vast amount of data, that can process it really quickly, where's the customer's AI? Where's the AI that advises people where to put their money? So there's something like $7 trillion in the United States sitting in deposit accounts at banks. Anybody here from a bank? Okay, let's talk about them. They're paying you way too little interest, much, much less than you can get from a money market fund with a big reputable firm that invests entirely in government securities. The only reason your bank account is safe at all is because it's backed by the government and the FDIC. So why not buy the government money market, short-term securities? And why not have an AI advisor that tells people where to put their money? I mean, we're talking about, interest rates, as you know, have just started to come down a little bit, but easily 4% difference in interest rates in what I just said. So AI tools that help people vis-a-vis the, whatever you want to call it, information system provided by corporate structures, whatever you want to call that, right? But actually putting these tools in the hands of people for financial planning purposes, make your own decision. Now, it's not it's also a regulated space, by the way, so you do have to be careful. But there's what I just put forward as an idea is completely legitimate and ethical and can be done in a fully compliant way. That has not happened. It's not the priority of Google or Microsoft. But hey, that's the point of critical thinking, right? That's the point of having this kind of discussion. That's the point of having these amazing professors. So you can think about things that people haven't, they've thought of it, but they haven't done it. That's your opportunity, John. So I've got one person set on the next career path. But, all right, this might take a long time this evening, but we'll go one by one. Who else has got? Yes. All right, you probably already have a job, yes.
Thank you for your talk. It was very interesting and I think important to hear that we have a choice. AI could be marshaled to good ends or not so good ends. And I wonder if you could say more about how you would apply that to our political processes. We're in an election season, I'm told. And I'm wondering if you are hopeful that our political processes will allow us to, seize the moment and do the right thing, or what would you want to say to political leaders or either political party or the electorate?
Well, I think this is a very, as already been mentioned a couple of times. I think it's a very difficult moment, in part because of the polarization, so it's a pre-existing condition, and the layering on top of that of social media, which was pre-AI, which exacerbated polarization, grab your attention, make you more emotionally engaged, make you more angry. That's the model. And I think AI, from what we can see, is exacerbating that problem in this moment. You know, what I would like to see, and what I would hope young people would want to see and would want to build, is more engaged discourse, more fighting to understand the real facts. I think that the key choice and the key problem we may have is that if you defer to AI for, quote unquote, the answer, you're putting a lot of power in the hands of whoever controls that answer, wherever that answer came from, which is a black box and not well understood, for example. You know, for all of its faults, I find Wikipedia to be, you can't use Wikipedia on my final exam, by the way, just to be clear. You have to go and dig into the sources. But what I like about it is it does show you, it tries to show you, purports to show you where it gets its information. So you can click on the footnotes, you can go check the underlying sources, you can go read that book and make up your own mind about what happened or what didn't happen. And I think that's back to the point about critical thinking, which is, what are your sources? You know, how do you know that's what are their biases? How do you know that's actually what was said, what actually happened? And I think that having more people do that, as opposed to rely on what they regard as authoritative sources, or even worse, rely on what Microsoft or Google tells them as an authoritative source, that's really, really important. And I think, you know, I chose to come to this country. I like this country. I stayed in this country. I believe in American democracy. I believe in the competition of ideas and the openness of the system. But I think we have to do better on this front going forward.
First, I just want to say thank you for speaking. I really enjoyed your lecture. My question is, do AI researchers and people who would like to implement automative technologies in the job market consider the philosophical complications of how a future where you don't have to work might not be good for people? It seems like work is something deeply human and is what we have evolved to do. Why aren't people having more conversations about this when talking about AI in the job market?
That is a very good question. I saw you reading your computer screen. I hope you typed it. You didn't ask ChatGPT to give that. Okay. Yeah, so that I think will be the topic of my next book, or the one after the next one, or that is absolutely on the agenda. I think that, you know, what is the value of, look, some jobs are incredibly hard, and some jobs are very dangerous, and some tasks should be given to machines, and we want to protect people's health and their mental well-being. But I agree with you on the, I think, what is the more general philosophical proposition that work has value. Many forms of work, compensated and not compensated, have value to people, and are an important part of identity, important part of what you do in the community, important part of how you relate to your family, and an important part of how we think about ourselves. And actually, that idea runs very deeply back into Greek philosophy. It's definitely there in many religious philosophies, including Christian philosophy and theology. And I think that if we give up work and we just say, oh, we don't want to work, we're going to have the machines do everything that's difficult or tedious or tiresome or everything, perhaps, I think we'll lose something. I think that in addition, we will lose a lot of what makes us creative. I think believing that the algorithms and any kind of routinized process is going to replace humans with all our quirkiness and all our ability to come up with strange ideas in difficult situations. I think that's a massive illusion. And I think we would regret it. I think we'd lose our American competitive edge if we did that too. But I agree that work, properly defined, carefully managed work, is important and helpful to people.
I think we'll have one more question. I'll pass the microphone down. So if you could.
They're all looking surprised. They don't know who's getting it. They're all looking at each other. I didn't ask for the microphone. No. No, keep going. I think keep going. She wants it.
Oh, okay.
Thank goodness. Sienna.
I was just curious, you've talked a bit about the impact of AI on young people and kind of our generation. How do you see that impacting people who are already established in their jobs and do jobs that aren't that kind of semi-repetitive nature that you've talked a lot about?
Right. So I think people like yourselves, well, on the upper echelon here, have the opportunity to this is already happening. You can see alternative routes. You can have these discussions. You can see, of your friends who gets ahead in the next couple of years and who struggles. So in a sense, you're a little bit better prepared for that. And you're very digital people. You've grown up with a lot of digital technology. So I think we're all hoping you'll be able to pivot. It is true that in previous difficult times, like the automation of the start of the 1980s and 1990s, that wave, the people who were probably hurt the most were people older than you, people in their 30s and 40s, which you probably call middle-aged. I call them relatively young people too. But people who are already established in their careers and who think that they've got it really nailed and this is going to be there forever. Well, I mean, there was a lot of people in the US after World War II thought they had lifetime employment in companies that didn't make it. And yes, I think, and we've also never been very good at helping people retrain and move to new activities in the US. We talk about that, but we don't put money into it. It doesn't sit well in the culture. So I think a lot of people with those jobs are going to struggle also. Yeah, that was a real downbeat. Can we have an upbeat final question for?
Hi, my question is the essence of AI is data and algorithm, and the essence of algorithm is math. Countries other than the US, such as France, Russia, China, they also have a stronger math education, but they do not have a powerful AI tools such as ChatGPT, a tool that is many times ahead of another AI tool. Do you think that the AI market will end up being a monopoly market, which will exacerbate the world's inequality? That's my question.
Yeah, okay, so if I understand the question correctly, AI is algorithms are math. There are lots of other countries that have good math, but we have a very strong position in computers and in the development of this technology. At this stage, I said 95% of the world's investment in foundation models. Will it exacerbate global inequality? Yes, I think that the path we're on will be very advantageous to some people in the United States, maybe a few people, but some people, the people who own these companies, for example, and the companies that succeed. It may be somewhat advantageous to other people in the room if they're able to take advantage of these opportunities. It will be somewhat problematic to other people in the US economy, and I think it will be potentially quite devastating to other countries, other places, quite far from us this evening, which think that they're not part of the same interconnected system, but they are. They sell to the world, they buy from the world. They don't, I mean, talk about political process and seats at the table. I mean, we can go to Washington and have a discussion about better jobs for more Americans. It's a very good discussion to have with lots of people in Washington. But where do you go to have the discussion about better jobs for more people in the world? I mean, it's not something that really happens. There's no political structure that manages that. Nobody's in charge of the world economy. Nobody has responsibility for that. You sink or swim in the world economy by yourself. And it would not be the first time that countries like that have been left behind, if not damaged by what's happened in a richer country like the United States. That was even more downbeat, Lewis, than the previous answer.
Well,
Let me get one more
why don't
positive
you
thing
have
to
the
end
last
on.
word? Why don't you have the last word about how you'd like to end this evening? What is there a message you'd like to leave us, or a point that
Yes. Look,
maybe we didn't get?
The message is exactly what was stated by your colleague over here, which is there is a choice. There is a choice. It's a real choice. It's a choice that we're making. It's a choice that's being made around us. It's a choice that our family's involved in. It's a choice that our company's involved in. And we can choose much better outcomes for ourselves, for our communities, and for the world in our personal choices, in our professional choices, in the things we choose to build, in how we choose to use technology. That's our choice, and it is with... It's up to me, but it's also up to you. And I think that together, if we focus, if we work on it, and put a lot of effort in, we can make a real difference in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you.